Hello, and welcome to Region Locked. As home console graphics improved, horror games became more prevalent with developers. Now that they could show scary stuff with greater fidelity, it allowed them to spook their players with greater effect. Many horror games are, unsurprisingly, geared more towards adult audiences. However, today we'll be looking at a survival horror title which decided to take a change in direction for the genre, being created for younger gamers, based upon a CG anime series. That game is Gregory Horror Show. Gregory Horror Show was developed by Capcom and released for the PlayStation 2 in 2003 in both Europe and Japan. The game opens with the protagonist walking through a thick fog in a forest, with no memory of how they came to this strange place. They soon see a light through the haze, guiding them into a hotel called Gregory House. Upon arrival, the player is greeted by Gregory, a mouse in charge of the residence. Though the player changes their mind about staying and decides to leave, they are told, just like the Hotel California, this is impossible. After finding out the player's name and gender, Gregory allows them entrance and provides them with a room to stay in whilst at the hotel, Room 101. During the player's first night sleeping in the hotel, they are greeted by a vision of Death, the Grim Reaper, within a dream. Death informs the player that they have become trapped within Gregory House. In exchange for the player's help, he promises to set the player free if they are willing to collect 12 lost souls from Gregory's residence. The player wakes from their slumber to the sound of screams coming from the adjacent room. The room is occupied by Nico Zombie, who has been locked inside. They request to be set free, asking the player to obtain the room key from Gregory. After stealing the key, Nico Zombie provides the player with their first soul. As the game progresses, more and more residents begin to occupy the hotel, and we learn more about how the hotel operates, and the many mysteries surrounding Gregory, his family, and the occupants of the hotel. Gregory Horror Show plays from a third-person perspective, and has many similarities to some iterations of Capcom's Resident Evil series. The player has the choice of playing as either a male or female protagonist, who must navigate the halls of Gregory's haunted hotel, solving item-based puzzles, stealing residents' souls, and avoiding the player's continued lapse into insanity. Most of the residents of the hotel will attempt to avoid the player if they still have their soul. As it is the player's goal to steal these souls, they must work out how to do so, varying in execution with each different character. For example, the first resident met is the friendly Nico Zombie, a zombie cat who will help the player on their mission. Unfortunately though, they have been confined to their room. To obtain his soul, the player must first gain access to his room by waiting for Gregory to leave his post at the reception, stealing the room key, and spying on the cat to learn of their weakness of sweets. Nico Zombie then asks the player to tell them what their weakness is, before rewarding the correct answer with their soul. More and more guests begin to appear as more souls are collected, each with their own unique requirements for stealing their souls. Rather than having a typical health gauge, the player's health is determined by their state of mind. Mental health can be recovered by sleeping it off, reading books around the haunted hotel, or by using herbs. Again, in a similar vein to Capcom's other survival horror series, Resident Evil. If the player becomes too traumatized, the character will go insane, leading to them becoming a permanent resident of Gregory House. If a character has had their soul stolen already, they will continue their routine across the game's maps, and if they spot the player, will chase them down and cause mental stress, decreasing the player's mental state by forcing them to watch a horror show, a short animated FMV, changing depending on which character catches the player. After the player has witnessed a character's horror show, all guests will be randomly teleported around the hotel before they return to their regular scheduled positions. If a guest catches the player before they have handed the soul over to Death, they will steal it back, forcing the player to obtain it again. Each of the game's different characters follow their own routines, based on the time of an in-game clock. By following characters and spying on them through keyholes, listening to what they're saying, a chime can be heard signifying that the player has unlocked a memo, giving the player a way of tracking each character's daily routines. As the player progresses, more characters begin to check in to the hotel, opening more resident rooms and other areas around Gregory House to explore. As more guests begin to try and hunt down the player, it becomes increasingly difficult to gather remaining souls. Additionally, guests begin to crop up who have a neutral reaction to the player, not necessarily causing harm, but simply annoyance, such as James, Gregory's grandson, who will follow the player and make a lot of noise, preventing the player from peeking through keyholes or entering certain areas. However, alongside this, neutral characters can be spoken with the possibility of providing hints on how to obtain souls from other guests. The player can be inflicted with several different status effects through different means. If the player doesn't go to sleep for over 8 in-game hours, they will fall into a state of tiredness. Though tiredness has no immediate effect, staying awake for an additional 2 hours will lead to a headache, causing the player's mental gauge to slowly deplete. After another 30 minutes, they will be inflicted with nervousness, causing healing items to be half as effective. Confusion will come into effect after being nervous for 15 minutes, scrambling the player's movements. Losing a soul to its original owner after a horror show will inflict melancholy, causing such extreme depression that they will no longer be able to run. The player can also suffer from darkness, making it harder to see far distances. Many of these conditions can be recovered through the use of status recovery items found throughout Gregory House, or by purchasing them in the Gregory Horror Shop. As there is no in-game currency to speak of, items must instead be traded for other items based on a 1 to 5 star ranking. Gregory Horror Show started its life as an anime, created by Naomi Owata, the same mind that would go on to create Pingu's latest Japanese original story, Pingu in the City. The original show already made use of CG for characters, making the process of replicating the visuals from the show into a game simple. With a total of 88 episodes, each running at only around 2 minutes apiece, the show ran for 4 seasons, each following different character arcs, mostly covering the bizarre nature of Gregory and his hotel. The series might have a very light-hearted appearance, but many of the stories followed themes of psychological turmoil, depression, and fear. The original 2 series of Gregory Horror Show almost looked like they belonged as cutscenes from a PlayStation 2 title, with the story being presented to the viewer as though they have arrived at Gregory House themselves, with characters speaking directly to the camera, similar to the first-person cutscene sequences featured in Gregory Horror Show's video game adaptation. After the game's release came a manga adaptation of the series called Gregory Horror Show Another World, created by Tsunami Suzuki. Iwata also announced on his website in 2016 that a new series is currently in production, though at the time of this video, details have remained somewhat scarce since this initial announcement. The video game adaptation of the show includes a huge quantity of Easter eggs and further divulging of character backstories from the show, such as characters providing additional information about the world of Gregory Horror Show whilst they roam the halls. Some items from the show can also be found whilst exploring. Much of Gregory Horror Show's quirks are often left up to interpretation. Remaining in the player's room can lead to voices being heard with either a criticizing or argumentative tone. It can be assumed that these voices come from the playable character's memories, perhaps suggesting the reason they ended up in the hotel to begin with. A Gregory Horror Show game was also released on mobile devices in 2018, called Gregory Horror Show Lost Qualia. The game has significant differences to the PlayStation 2 title, being more of a turn-based dungeon crawler RPG. The title has yet to receive any sort of English release or any sort of English promotion, so there's no idea as to whether this game will ever be localized outside of Japan. Gregory Horror Show was released in an interesting fashion. The show that it's based upon was mostly only recognized with Japanese audiences. With the European release, Capcom made the choice of releasing it at a discounted price, being only £20 at launch within the UK. While still in development in January 2003, IGN reported on the game, claiming that Capcom hoped to replicate Japanese interest in the series in North America, and that the game would be due out in the first quarter of 2004. Ultimately, the game released in August of 2003 in Japan and December in Europe. Upon the Japanese release of the game, IGN provided a hands-on article about their time with the title, suggesting that players wait for Capcom of America to assemble an English-language version. While an English-language release would come to fruition, an American release did not. In 2004, a user online posted what was Sony's alleged concept approval process, claiming that Sony Computer Entertainment of America would reject any 2D games and that gameplay plays little importance rather than graphics. It's possible, for this reasoning, that Gregory Horror Show was not given a chance with an American audience, being that the defined aesthetic of the series is that characters all appear as block-like and fairly rudimentary. This era saw many gamers raising issues with Sony's localization choices, with several games not seeing release simply because of their appearance. While this can't be confirmed as the exact reason the game never saw light in America, it certainly seems the most likely. Capcom had clearly already been working on the game with the assumption that an English localization would be published, and thus it was still released in Europe, where Sony Computer Entertainment of America would not be able to determine which titles would be allowed release. Reception of Gregory Horror Show was generally quite favorable. While many were disappointed by the game's lack of an extensive playtime, they praised the unique nature of the title and its charming yet disarming appearance.
Hi, I'm Gregory. Welcome to the Hotel Patreon. This is the Vitas Varna Suite. It's the finest room we have to offer. Corey Nelson made you some soup. It's Everett Lathrop's favourite. What? You say you wouldn't even feed this to a Clefairy? I hope Chad Bannon doesn't hear you say that. Trevor Wooten said the same thing last week. He was hit by an error 1355. Fine, if you don't want it, I'll just give it to Malcavio. He was raving about it to Guillermo Chavez.
Oh, hey guys, Jedistottle7 told me to bring you some cutlery for your soup. Your boy Beowulf didn't have any spoons though, so I brought Robert Cox's bladed spoon instead.
It's 3 Master Gamers flavor. It contains 3223232 spices. Can you taste the Maximilian Summers? Oh, that's your favorite? Ken111 told me so. I'm glad he's not wrong. The Natch would have been so disappointed. Oh, you found the free toy. Why Move Queen Mab would be so jealous.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of Region Locked. Really, I think Greg should have voiced it, but, you know, I bought this game on release. I didn't get very far because, as a younger gamer, I found it pretty scary. If you've got young ones at home, perhaps this would be a good introduction to the horror genre for them. One thing I can say for sure, it's spooky. I hope that none of you ever wake up to find yourselves entering the Hotel of Gregory.